Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so very happy that you are part of our Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Google Podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Stitcher Radio, on Luminary. Wherever you find your podcasts, you can find us. Speaking of finding, today we're speaking to the author of The Little Lost Fairy. Her name is Rebecca Sosny. Hey, I was telling you that you can find the Reading with Your Kids podcast on all these different podcasting platforms. Himalaya, the largest podcasting platform in Asia, of course, on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Stitcher Radio. Well, you can also find us at the 17th Annual Chicago Toy and Game Fair, November 23rd and 24th at Navy Pier in Chicago. It is going to be a blast. We are creating this totally interactive experience for you and your family where you can find out what it feels like to be a guest on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Your children at this fair, there's so much going on with this fair. Your kids can play with life-size toys and games from all around the world. They're going to have a chance to meet authors, inventors. They're going to just see things that they can't even imagine seeing. It's just amazing. There are going to be characters there, interactive stage shows, and so much more. And check this out. Listeners of the Reading with Your Kids podcast can save $3 on every ticket they purchase by going to shytag.com, CHITAG.com, shytag.com, and using the promotional code RWYK. That's the Reading with Your Kids podcast initials. RWYK at checkout, and you can save $3 off of every ticket you buy, and there are no limits as to how many tickets you can purchase. Check it out today. It's the Chicago Toy and Game Fair, November 23rd and 24th at Navy Pier. Joining us on the line right now from Lewiston and the great state of Maine. I love Maine. I love Lewiston. It is a beautiful part of the world. Our guest today is the author of The Little Lost Fairy. Please welcome to the show, Rebecca Sosny. Rebecca, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Rebecca and I were just chatting about, I've performed in Lewiston many, many times. It's a lovely part of the world. Maine is such, people just don't understand. It is such a diverse part of the world. Not so much population-wise, although we're talking a little bit about the diversity in Lewiston. But it is, you have this incredible coastline that is so long, and then you have a couple of really cool cities. Portland is an especially cool little city, and then you have places like Aroostook County and the mountains of Maine, and it's just such an incredible place.
Thank you. I love living here. So
yeah, and I was amazed the first time I went up when my host explained to me that there are more people living in the city of Boston than live in the entire state of Maine.
Most likely, yes.
So we don't want to talk about the entire state of Maine. We want to talk about The Little Lost Fairy. Please tell us all about this book, please.
Okay, so I wrote this book back in 2013 when I was taking a class for children's lit because I am a preschool teacher, and I was taking this for part of my certification. At that time, my daughter was 12, and my aunt, her great aunt, was diagnosed with breast cancer for the second time. The first time my daughter was 1. The second time was 12 and a half years later. My daughter at that time thought that fairies could cure her. So I wrote the book to basically to help my family. About 2 years ago, I was encouraged by family and friends to really pursue getting it published because there aren't a lot of books for children to explain what cancer is about, that it's not so scary, and that basically it takes away your hope, and that if we can spread a little hope, that maybe we can find a cure.
Yeah, as soon as I heard you say, I wrote the book, to help folks understand that cancer is not so scary. I heard 1,000 people scream, "What do you mean cancer is not scary? Cancer is terrifying."
It is very terrifying. And for adults, we have that fear, but to explain what cancer is to a child without getting into the medical terms of what cancer is, that this would help them show more compassion and understanding for what goes on. My aunt mentioned years, when I had my first book signing, she was there. And yes, she survived. 2 times she survived. She said when her boys were little, there weren't any books there. It was all medical books, like explaining all of these really scary terms and what was going to happen to her. But it didn't talk about how if we just have a little hope in our lives that everything would be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, coming from a family that's dealt with this 2 times, it can be very scary because as adults we understand that. But for a child, we just need to explain that the person's outer appearance is going to change a little bit, but they're still the same person on the inside.
And I think that is really important. And it's also very, very important for us to realize that there is hope. When I was 12 years old, for most folks, cancer was a death sentence. There weren't a lot of people who were surviving cancers when I was 12 years old. But nowadays, we're living in a time right now where there are a lot of people who are surviving. It's a terrible treatment route, and and it's a struggle, and it's difficult for everybody. But there is hope, and I think that's in addition to the medical treatment and all of the medical professionals. I think one of the reasons people are surviving more is because we have more hope.
Absolutely. The story is just about my daughter and a little fairy that just shows her that her aunt is a child at heart and just grants her family hope and wellness. The other thing that's very interesting about my book is I could not have done this without the illustrations of Jeannie Conway. I wanted the characters of my book to look like my family. Mm-hmm. And so I sent pictures to her of my daughter, my son, my granddaughter, my niece, pictures of my aunt. And she created them. They came to life on the pages. So it's pretty special to just not myself, but my family in general. That this book is out there to share, the things that we went through.
I'd love to talk a little bit about why it was so important for you that the characters in the book looked like the people in your family.
Because so when your family member has cancer, it affects not just that person, but your entire family. Mm-hmm. And this was a way for not just myself, but for my family to heal. So, like I said, I never intended it to ever be published. Mm-hmm. I had initially wrote this story and I had done my own illustrations and I had made copies for my entire family. I never ever planned on getting it published. But my family just said, you push me, said you need to. You really do. It's a wonderful story and it shows the magic of hope, like what you can do with just a little bit of hope.
I'm curious, you talked about writing the book for your family mm-hmm. to help give them hope. Mm-hmm. The process of writing was that something that you did to give yourself hope?
Absolutely. Like when I was taking the children's lit class, I just said, if I'm going to have to write a story for my children's lit class, I'm going to do it with some meaning and purpose. Just not for me, but for everybody. Mm-hmm. But it was a great it was a great way for me to express how hard it was, not just on my aunt herself, but for me as well.
I'm curious, what was your aunt's reaction when she first read the book?
She cried. She cried. She still cries when she reads it.
That must be incredibly moving for you. I'm imagining their tears of joy.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. We were so overwhelmed that, she survived stage 4 breast cancer the second time around. And, being so young the first time, she was only 40 the first time she was diagnosed. And then 52, 12 and a half years later. That's very rare for cancer to come back after 7 years, and it did. And here she is, just had her 60th birthday and she's still cancer free. I've read this book to my preschool class. I have read it to other children. I've actually given some books away to other families that are going through the same ordeal that my family went through.
Mm-hmm. What are the reactions of the kids who are hearing it, who don't have a family member that is sick?
And to be honest with you, some of them actually have asked, what is cancer? And I tell them that it's a illness that makes you very, very sick, and that we just want them to get better. I had sold a book to a friend of my daughter's, and she has a little girl, and her first question after listening to the story was Taylor's Aunt Jean really sick? And she said, yeah, she was, but she's better now. So they do question whether or not, people who know me, whether or not the story is actually true. And it does have some facts in it, besides the fact that maybe fairies are real, maybe they're not. But for my daughter, they were always real.
You mentioned being a preschool teacher, and I know as an educational magician, as I've gone around and presenting character education-based shows in schools, there are a lot of times if the school was asking me to come in and talk about making healthy choices in regards to substance abuse or alcohol or tobacco. Oftentimes we would hear some backlash from families of young kids saying, I don't want my kids hearing about that stuff, and they're too young to hear about this stuff. What's your perspective? You've dealt with, I'm sure, many preschool kids over the years. Are preschool kids a lot stronger than most adults give them credit for?
Absolutely. Children are much more resilient than we think that they are. I mean, yes, they can handle a lot of trauma, but when things are explained in a certain way, they are definitely able to understand it. You don't need to have all that medical terminology for a child to understand that there's something going on that's not right. They can feel the tension. They can see it in people's faces. Just because you're not talking about it doesn't mean they're not realizing that something's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Truer words have never been spoken. I mentioned the fact that, I was a kid many years ago. And, at that time, people didn't talk about things. I don't think I attended my first funeral until my grandfather passed and I was 16 years old. There were certainly people who passed in our neighborhood and in our family. In fact, there was, friends of mine passed, and a lot of times parents would just go, "Oh, yep, that happened, and we're not talking about it anymore."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people purchase my book directly from me who have read it from another person saying, "Oh, I need to get that book because, my friend's going through this or her family's going through this." I mean, it's a children's book and it's read for a children's book, but it can also help an adult as well.
Now, what would you say? This is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and of course, I can absolutely envision myself reading this book with my kids when they were younger. Because we had one of their classmates had cancer and fought many years and eventually passed from it. I can absolutely see myself reading this book, and I can also absolutely see myself crying as I was reading this book. You mentioned that your aunt cried as she read the book.
Yes.
I imagine some parents out there would say, "No, I don't want to read this book with my kids. I don't want my kids to see me crying." What do you say about that?
I think that it's okay for parents to show emotions, because how else is your child going to understand or self-regulate themselves if they can't understand what their parent is feeling? I mean, we have a lot of children, that go through certain things and traumas in their life that parents have kept their feelings inside. It's okay to share and explore those feelings and to understand the difference between anxiety and being scared and not knowing what to do. If we explain to our children how we're feeling, I think that they're going to open up and explain how they're feeling too. And they're going to ask more questions. We just have to be ready as even an educator or a parent to be able to answer those questions.
Yeah. It's funny as you were speaking, it's natural for us to let our kids know that something is heavy and that it's a struggle to pick this up, or doing this task is hard work. And boy, after I do, mow the lawn for 2 hours, that I come in and it's okay for the kids to see dad kind of collapse on the couch and, have a cold glass of iced tea or whatever. And it's okay to see parents, experience that kind of exhaustion. But, there's this, some folks don't want their kids to see them, struggling with their emotions. And I think what you said was absolutely right. That's the perfect way for our kids to learn.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I'm a parent. I have a 25-year-old son and a 20-year-old daughter and a soon-to-be 3-year-old granddaughter. And I've always told them how I was feeling. They've seen me cry. They've seen me sad. And I've seen them cry. Even as adults now, you have to be able to share your feelings and your emotions to be able to get through anything through life.
Yeah.
Is to share your feelings. I mean, I say that and I express that to my pre-K parents too. Share with your child. Let them know how you're feeling. It's okay for them to realize that, something is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that you've created this book that allows, we talk about the fact that, there are a lot of books that allow kids to talk about tough subjects. If they're experiencing bullying at school, then maybe we sit down and we read a book about a fictional character who's kind of going through the same things. And this might be the key that helps them feel a little bit more comfortable about sharing about that. I think it's wonderful that you've created a book that can help kids, give kids hope, but also is maybe, that key that unlocks the door for parents to start talking to their kids about a situation that's going on in their family that would be difficult for them to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I remember when I had my first book signing, when the book first came out, I was in North Conway, New Hampshire, and that's where my aunt resides. And so we did it at the bookstore there. A family showed up that I had known, and she had brought this little girl with her. And she came up to me and she said, "I just want to let you know that her mom is in hospice right now, and they're giving her less than 24 hours to live. And she was dying of cancer." And little girl was about 12 years old. and her dad did not send her with any money to purchase a book. And so I gave her one and sent it home with her so that she at least had something to grab a hold of, even though her mom probably was not going to make it through the night. At least she had something to hold close to her for the rest of the night. It was very sad, but I'm glad that she was there for the reading and was able to go home with the book.
I'm wondering it's we've had lots of authors on, doing readings about, their book that talks about Mommy's Big Red Monster Truck and, the last surviving dinosaur that has a silly, silly name. You going into libraries and bookstores and reading this book, that must be a different experience.
It is for me. I'm used to doing story time being a teacher and reading books, but to read it to people that I don't know, that I haven't actually made a relationship with, is very different. But they seem to enjoy it. I haven't walked away from a signing or a reading without someone walking away with a book. So, which is nice.
That is wonderful. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't take this chance, speaking with a preschool teacher, a veteran preschool teacher, share with us your opinion of how important is it for parents or for caregivers to sit down and read with their kids every day?
Oh, it's very important. That pre-reading skills, even if your child is not reading yet, I suggest that you start reading with your child as soon as your child starts speaking those words. Even before that, it increases vocabulary, it increases perception, emotional stability. It creates a bond between the parent and the child. I mean, it only takes 10, 15 minutes a night to open up a book and read with your child. It is so important. It even helps with your pre-math skills because you're reading from, your left to your right. Mm-hmm. It's just the basic skills. I mean, you need to learn how to read. Mm-hmm. And I tell parents, because I work with some parents that may not be able to read themselves. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you know the words. Sit down, open up the book, and talk about what's on the page. Make up your own story. At least you're encouraging your child to look at that book, to open their imagination, to see what they have there, to recall the information that you said the night before.
Mm-hmm. And for those parents who aren't able to read, I love that you're encouraging them to sit down and to open up the book and to look at the pictures and create your own story. And hopefully that bond that they're creating with their kids in that special moment will hopefully inspire the parent to go out and get the help they need so that they can learn to read.
Yes, absolutely. It's a wonderful experience. I remember reading with my own children, growing up, and, every night with my son, it was a different book. And by the time he was in kindergarten, he was already reading and surpassing reading. So we ended up doing chapter books, and he was doing a chapter a night with me. I'd read one page, he'd read the other. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Now, did your kindergarten kid do the same thing mine did? Come home and pretend, oh, Poppy, read to me. Oh, yes, okay. And then went to school, and the teacher's like going, yeah, he's already reading. I'm like, what do you mean he's already reading? He won't read with me.
No, he knew how to read, like even before he started kindergarten. So he was quite the avid reader. By the time he was in third grade, he was reading at a sophomore level. So
wow.
Yeah,
that's incredible. Well, it doesn't matter. There's no guarantee if you start reading to if you did what I did and read to your kid while they're in the womb. I read somewhere that helped. I did it, but we read with our kids right from before they entered the world. That's not a guarantee that they're going to be reading at a sophomore level when they get to third grade.
No, absolutely not. But you can always dream.
Yes.
And that the more you encourage reading, the more time you spend reading with your child, the stronger their reading skills are going to get.
Yeah.
That even that auditory piece of hearing someone read out loud, it just increases your vocabulary. Even if they don't understand the words that are on the page, it opens up those world of learning to see, oh, well, I never heard that word before, so what does that mean? You know?
And you mentioned that the thing that I think is most important is that bond that we create with our kids. And I like to say that reading with our kids, reading with our 1 and 2-year-old kids, it's the beginning of a lifetime conversation that, goes from, reading those board books together, and it evolves into Dr. Seuss, and it evolves into conversations about boys with your girls and girls with your boys, and about making healthy choices when they're teenagers, and talking about, are you going to have kids with your son as you're on the way to his wedding ceremony?
Absolutely. I mean, my son reads to his daughter all the time, and she is going to be 3, and she's already memorized most of her board books. Like, she can pick it up and tell us from page to page what the story is about, word for word. So she's actually memorized her board books without realizing, hey, I'm memorizing, But she opens up the pages and tells us exactly what's on each page.
Well, for a debut book, The Lost Little Fairy is making a big impact in the lives of a lot of folks. Is this inspiring you to continue to create new children's books?
I've actually started working on a second book. It is called The Little Lost Fairy of Courage. I won't go into any more details, but it's going to be more about inspiring little girls to be brave, to have courage, and to reach for goals that typically that they wouldn't reach.
Well, we can't wait for you to come back and share with us all about that book. Now, if folks want to know more about Rebecca Sosny and about The Lost Little Fairy, where can they go to get that information?
I have a Facebook page on Facebook. It's Little Lost Fairy. I also have a webpage, littlelostfairy.com, or they can get my book through Mascot Publishing.
Excellent. We've been talking to the author of The Little Lost Fairy, Rebecca Sosny. Rebecca, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guests will be husband and wife team, Harry and Deepti. They are the authors and illustrators of The Seekers. It's an intense and beautiful picture book. And we have a fantastic, fantastic conversation. You don't want to miss it. If you are the author of a great children's book, I would love to have a fantastic and fascinating conversation with you here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast, giving you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic children's book. It really is fun. It really is easy. All you need to do is to go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know about your great book. We will let you know the next easy steps. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so very, very wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Rebecca Sosny. Be sure to check out The Lost Little Fairy. I want to thank my producer, Fatima Khan. Be sure to check out her blog at readingwithyourkids.com. So much more information there. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support that she gives me. And, of course, most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And thank you so much for taking the time to bond with your kids, to grow closer with your kids, to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.